But next we're going to start off with our summer to-do list. And there we've got with us today, we've got Ann Mulder. I think you'll all remember her from the fall. A great resource, both during the fall and throughout the spring. We also have brought with us Greg. Would you like to stand up and say hi? Greg Shipp is from Conroe ISD. So Ann, I'll let you go ahead and come on up here and get them started on their summer to-do list.
Glad to see everybody. You looked good when you were checking in at registration. Sounds like several of you have had an excellent year, really diving in and getting going. Greg is going to jump in too as we talk through this. This is just the next half hour is just giving you some heads up on our collective experience about the typical duties or responsibilities that can come up within your capacity as a CTE leader in your given district. It'll vary a little bit depending on the size of district that you serve and whether you're with the ESC or local districts. So you'll absolutely want to tailor this information to your community's needs, your district's needs, and your position. But it does give you, if you're not directly responsible for something that we cover, it may give you a point of conversation to have within the district as well. So we'll just dive in, and both Greg and I will give you a couple of examples. He serves in Conroe ISD that has 7 current high schools and an 8th one on the way. And my background was with a formerly 4A school district with 1 high school. So this is from David Barrier. Just wanted to throw that in. Especially this time of year when you're getting ready for Perkins and the grant applications and getting ready for next year. It's very important to just be on all levels, ready to roll. I would throw a caveat as we get going on this. I considered this a list, kind of a spring/summer. There's no way when I was with Friendswood that I would have started this list today in June. If any of this information is new to you now, you can make a note of it for next year, and you can plan it back as early as you're comfortable for what your district's needs are and your community's needs. CTE program evaluations, we'll have a breakout session that Greg will lead on that tomorrow, and there'll be a lot of data in there, but generally that's something that has to be accomplished utilizing your teachers and getting their feedback, students and families, and so starting it in mid-June probably wouldn't be as effective as bumping it back earlier. But again, Greg will have some great information about that tomorrow.
We're going to wrap that all together. There are so many great sources of information for you and so many great resources in your community and your school district. We'll put all that together tomorrow and show you guys what you're already doing. There's the good news.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're already doing many things, but just how to make that process formalized and then share those results with the community and also with our friends at the agency.
And be aware other curriculum areas don't necessarily stipulate that a program evaluation is necessary, but it absolutely is for CTE. All right, well, there have been listserv announcements about the Perkins and the grant application process and its availability. And an additional piece is that program effectiveness piece that is also a summer or spring project, depending on when it becomes accessible. And so those 2 items are, several of you mentioned, I think last year, that completing that application or reviewing it was your introduction to your position. That was true of several folks here anyway. So it's that time again, and just have that on your radar screen. It is not something that can be done quickly in 99.9% cases. And it's something that's important to be on your radar screen so you've got enough time blocked out to do that and do it well. And to gather the information that's needed on this from your faculty before they leave for the summer as well. That's a piece we tried to address in the fall just to give you a heads up, but I wanted to reiterate that again. There's nothing like having everybody gone and then get to page 42 and realize, oh shoot, I needed completer information with ethnicity or gender breakouts or something. So just looking that over, being aware of what you're asked to report on is critical. And of course, every year you do it, it's a lot more comfortable. Every district will handle this a little differently, but in Friendswood, I was always very involved with the master schedule, especially for some of our specialization capstone courses that have special needs with respect to master schedule. It was very interesting to me to hear the presentation today about the new changes with respect to how curriculum is going to be handled and units of credit will be handled. And I think they've done an absolutely beautiful job of allowing a lot of flexibility for districts to continue to meet student needs with respect to that. But looking at junior high and high school, or middle school and high school, and looking at the number of sections that are needed to serve your students well, and what those specific intricacies are. I'll just throw out an example. AP Cal was something we taught at Friendswood every year, but we didn't teach a lot of sections of it. And we had a really dynamic group year after year of students that are interested in the clinical within health science technology. And most of them were also in that advanced math. So if those two sections were offered in an opposite way, we always had at least 30 kids with conflicts. We could avoid that if we knew up front and considered that. Greg, I'm sure, in Conroe, that's a whole different deal when you're talking 8 or 9 schools, or HISD is 38. So, what?
I can tell you, and I tend to be a little bit talky, so I'm going to try to rein myself in on this, because I get excited about evaluation especially. And I was talking about master schedule. One thing I'm going to encourage you to do when you're looking at your numbers, track those. Look at your pre-enrollment numbers for CTE first. When you look at your master schedule, usually what those enrollment numbers end up telling you is how well the master schedule is balanced. But if you'll track your pre-enrollment numbers, then you'll see a trend. Look at 3 years worth of data. If you're really looking at where you want to grow your programs or where you need to make some adjustments, look at the pre-enrollment data. If you've got 3 years worth of data that shows you are consistently, you have 400 students interested, and you have 200 slots, and you've got some information.
Yeah.
You go to your board, your leadership, and talk about junior high as well. Look at your student interests over 3 years. Let's see if there's a trend in that. And also with the endorsements, we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, surveys and graduation plans to get a sense of where your interest is going to be. Yeah. And that makes it easier to manage. And then the rubber meets the road when you're building the schedule for the fall, because that's bottom line. That's what you've got to do to be able to pull off school for the fall, and making sure that that's in good order. You'll be asked to serve different roles in hiring. Some districts rely very heavily on their CTE leadership to be completely clear on certifications and appropriate areas, and others have the CTE leadership weigh in or do pre-screening or pre-interviewing, and then in some districts the principal does the final hiring. In other districts it's a collaborative venture. In some districts it's given to the CTE director. It just varies from place to place. However, regardless of how it's done in your district, you want to be sure there's a good, solid process for understanding what the special needs are when you're hiring a person, especially with the variety of different teaching certificates that a qualified candidate can bring forward. It's important for there to be a good, clean understanding of who a qualified candidate is, and then also look at how to best serve those kids.
This is pretty important. When you come to a leadership role, when you come to that CTE director role, take a look at everyone that you're funding out of your state funds. You're 199.
Right.
22. When I came into Conroe ISD, the first thing I did, first couple months on the job, I pulled my 199 program to 22. I was paying for OTC, I was paying for journalism, I was paying for driver's ed, and I said, no. Matter of fact, I have a journalism teacher still mad at me. She's waiting on a computer lab. But if you're involved in the hiring process up front, you approve those credentials. You review them. You can go to the SBAC website, you can get your certification flow chart, and you can see if that teacher is appropriately certified for the CTE
And it's really nice. If you've vetted those candidates accurately, then you know by the time they come in for that face-to-face interview or that Skype interview that you're really looking at viable people that could work with your kids. And that's just so important. I don't know how many of you in the room have experienced this, but when we went to electronic human resources tools, we ran into a whole nother issue, which to this day is still plaguing the district a little bit, and it's a fairly common thread from district to district, and that is not every applicant is a qualified applicant. So we'd post a position and overnight have 45 applicants, and I'd go in and start looking at them, and I had a kindergarten teacher, and I had, it was great, great skills, but no relevant, CTE experience and no certification, and, just interested in the curriculum and thought it would be fun, and just didn't realize what was necessary to go. So there are some ways to screen in the software. There are some questions that can be put into the software that ask candidates, do you possess a valid teaching certificate? And, there are, in what areas, and it asks them to check those things off. But I found that really changed. When we went electronic, it took a lot more time to screen viable candidates before we even got to the face-to-face.
If you're a large district, one of the things that we do that's very helpful, I actually have a booth for career tech in our job fair. We usually get between 1,800 and 2,000 applicants. They'll come to me first. I'll vet their credentials, and then we'll have all of our high schools and junior highs in the horseshoe, and I'll tell them, we've got an opening at this campus. They can go meet with the administration right then, and that really works very effectively for us.
Right. There's an annual requirement to publicize a non-discrimination statement in the community, and that should be put out to the community as broadly as possible. Both, newspapers are a bit of a dying breed in some ways and shapes and forms. Their circulation numbers have changed fairly radically in the last 5 years, but newspapers are still a good addition to reaching to the community. But electronic versions of this on the website and in publications that go to families. It's just important to show a variety of methods and to make those available in languages that are most accessible to your community. So again, you just look inward and decide what the best way to get that done is. But be aware of it. That has to be published before school starts, a full... Exactly. Right. And if you serve another specific population, just be sure and have that translated too. It has to be out there at least a week before school starts, but I never wanted to play it that close.
And it takes a while to get that in the queue in your newspaper, so you want to give yourself a little bit of time. That's something like
And we had, yes, it can be done in the summer, yes. I always kept copies of where I put it and threw it in a file. And we had to pay for it the last 5 or 6 years recently, where in the past it had been, so I always had a budget available to do that because the newspapers were no longer able to do it complimentary. Did you have a comment?
What the par? My idea was perfect.
Yes, absolutely.
If you ever have to go through one of those, you will have to show that article. So
Right.
One of the things you can do that's really helpful is I've advised districts that you might want to go ahead and start making those, that go off each one of those indicators, the 29 indicators, and overview.
And keep a working file on those things. I did too. And we were never, we never had that kind of review in the district I served, but I always had my files current. I kept them every year, and it just allowed us that assurance that we were doing everything we needed to do to serve kids best. So, and then if you do get involved with any other type of review, you've got that data handy and available. We were talking not very long ago about professional development needs. In my district, that decision was made, the schedule about in-service and professional development for teachers throughout the district was made within a couple days of graduation. We were looking at the calendar for next year. And by the time our district leadership team met 2 weeks later, that had already been decided. So I always like to have those conversations with my assistant soup on what our needs were and how we could fit into the district's vision for serving kids at the time they were making that decision. And then they could get us on the calendar, and we were all pulling the same direction, and it worked well. How is it handled in Conroe?
Well, I can say there are two things. One, we look at our district initiatives identified by data. And for example, professional learning communities, we started those about 4 years ago. And so my CTE teachers are infinitely involved in professional learning community training. But also the other thing is, we were talking about the PAR process. Look at the data in your district. In the state of Texas, we're
Right.
held accountable the way that we're held accountable. Then the state of Texas would be out of compliance in two areas, and that would be CTE left and CTE special ed. So look at your data in your district. We have been working now for 6 years very closely with both special education and the ESL bilingual department in my district, and we have a year-long and annual staff development calendar where we bring all of those programs, all three of those programs together to give continuous training to our teachers. So,
And the other thing we used to make sure was on our agenda, our best time to work with teachers in a cross-disciplinary way was over the summer and pushing into the fall in service. And so that was another thing that we tended to like to get done, was have our plan for integrating CTE with academics in place when we were developing that professional development calendar. It just, made sense, and teachers had everything they needed to be able to serve kids. So again, consider your district's needs in your community and who you're working with. And if you don't know, it's a great conversation point to go back and have those discussions. Oh, this was a biggie. As everything changes and moves forward, and you've got new programs and new teachers and new folks, or existing teachers that need new information, making sure they have all the access to, whether it's online through CTE 101, or if it's a culinary experience and they need to go to a special training over the summer, or gosh, if it's principals of tech teachers that need to go have that additional piece. There's just forensic medicine. There are all kinds of different trainings that occur in the summer that prepare that teacher to really be ready to roll. If you're a Project Lead the Way school who's serving kids with that kind of curriculum, those trainings occur in the summer. Those are intensified, but plans for that all need to be in place. And this is another one I would bump back to the spring. And your teachers for their professional development conferences. So all of that, we always planned with faculty in the spring, and then made sure there was budget money that didn't get spent. And we had an in-house policy to spend the rest of our money by March at the latest, and I always had a conversation with the executive financial person in our district and explained, I've allocated this chunk of money for professional development in the summer. That's a special need of CTE staff, maybe even more so than some other areas, and so I've held this back, and they were fine. But knowing about that was very important, because otherwise they would have handled it differently, because everybody else pretty much had their money spent. So just having those communications, I think, can save you a lot of angst in the end. Refurbishing labs, I think that's so important to be able to, that's a clean moment when kids aren't just everywhere, and you can take a look at what needs to be done.
when we say state-of-the-art industry standard, that's not just a buzzword. What I try to help districts understand is, if our programs are, we're just like a business. Career tech, we're just like this, we're like industry. If we're static, we're in decline. That's where the advisory committee comes in extremely helpful. And Ann's going to talk with you about advisory committees in just a minute. But to have that advisory committee come in, help you evaluate, look at which equipment needs to be upgraded, and then use those written recommendations to go to your school district. It's very helpful, and they have the way in the community to help you get some things done. The instructional materials, AU involved in INA this year. Holy smokes. You know what's
Yeah.
going on? Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Keep your committee together.
Right, and having a plan, right? How many in the room are on a high school campus? housed on a high school campus. Those of you who had your hands in the air, this task is just a little bit easier than those of you who are housed more remotely in a central administration kind of setting. But however it works, it can be done. You just want to be alert to it and aware of it, because the further away from the campus you are, the easier it is to not quite be as aware sometimes that something is in need, and you'll depend on your folks who are right there in the front lines to kind of give you some feedback. We made that part of our program eval from our teachers, and that's another communication tool you can use. The other thing I wanted to mention real quickly here is we did long-range planning too. So we knew within 5 years we were going to upgrade XYZ's lab completely head to toe. When I left, everything had been upgraded. Every single program at my retirement had been upgraded. And we were on a 5-year schedule where we knew where we were headed. And then, the current gal is doing a great job of anticipating those needs. And those will change. That's only a plan of action. If you have legislative changes that affect your programming, if you have other things that come as a reality, your first obligation is to train and prepare those kids. So, you can modify that, but I found the long-range planning helpful for budgeting especially. And that was another area where CTE got an exception to spend money, in the spring and summer, not necessarily by March 1st, which was our local policy. Travel for students and teachers, national, state, CTSO conferences. Be sure that you're aware of how your district wants that travel handled and that you're in compliance with all of that. If it's competitions, sometimes there are districts that have kids do all of their own fundraising, so that's an element that you need to be aware of. There are still accountability procedures for maintaining accurate financial records if that money is fundraised, but just be alert to all of that and make sure you know. If you're a district administrator in a large district, that may be handled in specific by the campus administrator, but you just want to have conversations so you know how that's being done and who's managing what. And Ag every summer has their big conference, so that's a huge piece.
If you're in a district with multiple campuses, it might be helpful for you to create an Excel document, drop in all the summer conferences, and as you get those requests, drop it in there and keep track of who wants to go where. One of the things that we ask in my district, I'm just saying this is what we do, if they are going to get an industry credential, a certificate, or a license, or renew a certificate or a license, then we give them priority consideration for funding the state staff development.
And in our district, it was an expectation that our staff attend annually, and we talked to folks about that when we hired, and we had great responses. There were a few exceptions we made along the way, but for the most part, we budgeted for it and had really good experiences with that. And that teachers had a lot of ownership in what they were doing, too, as a result of that. Budget and fiscal management. Wrapping up outstanding POs and invoices and getting them paid on time and locking it all down, that's a critical aspect of it. And not having that be a surprise, and being aware of how your Perkins budget timeline differs from your state budget timeline is a critical discernment for you as a new administrator. Just be really clear. I used to call it little money, big money, just to keep the business office straight on which one I'm talking about. But we were just wanting to be sure that was nice and clear and distinct, and not getting caught off guard with that. Having a plan, if you have any POs coming in over the summer, make sure there's someone to receive them that isn't the high school employee part-time who's signing in with the FedEx guy. Yeah, and then knowing where those go so they can be inventoried and appropriately signed off. You don't want to wait till August before somebody comes back, and that's a nightmare. So especially if you're not on your district, on your high school campus, you just want to know who's doing that and how it's being handled so you don't have something lost. Our biggest interesting moment years ago
was like the second or third year we became involved with Project Lead the Way, and they sent out a little thumb drive that had a huge software update that was huge, but it was physically small. It ended up in our English team lead's mailbox for a month while we pulled that high school apart looking for it. So I think it's best to have your folks there when those things are expected, and we always just made arrangements from then on. You know, you learn as you run into experiences to adapt. Anything else, Greg? Oh, summer travel reports, everybody does it differently, but for our folks who had extended contracts or additional stipend days, however your teachers are looked at, we wanted to be sure we had appropriate documentation for their responsibilities, and so we always collected that at the same time as we dealt with the budget stuff. We always like to get our plans together for being able to figure out when we were going to meet with staff about their budgets for the fall. And frankly, that was easier to plan in July and August than it was when the heat of the moment of trying to start school is upon you. It was nice to have that already blocked out on the calendar and had a plan of approach for managing that. Certainly there's most districts have a concentrated in-service opportunity at the beginning of the year before school starts, making sure CTE is part of that plan, finding a way to involve your new hires. There's a lot of discussion about retaining new teachers. A big piece of retaining new teachers is how you mentor them and work with them at the beginning. It's such a wonderful occupation, but such an overwhelming occupation. And so having a strategy and a mentor teacher that won't eat them, all those things. Don't forget somewhere in the midst of this to have your own moment. So, any questions or comments about your experiences as you guys have been diving into this first year? Anybody got a lesson learned you want to share with the group? Yeah.
Yeah, teacher certifications, chapter 231 and 233. I can't tell you enough how many schools I've been to where somebody has a beautiful laminated document sitting on their desk from 2012 or 2013. And a prime example would be the 6th grade math. That's been a real issue for people. And I know that's not really CTE, but I'm using this as an example. There's certain certifications that have been wiped off that list. So like if you were a special ed, I'm trying to remember the exact cert, but there was one cert that had always been in there, and now it's not. So if you're going to be certified, you're going to be looking for CTE, go to the website, go to Educator, go over to Educator Rules, find the latest and greatest, chapter 231, and cross-reference chapter 233. Chapter 233, 13 and 14 will tell you the difference between work-related experience and non-work-related experience. I'm actually trying to build a chart because the last one we built at Region 10 is kind of older. It's a quick review, but I always tell people it's good to go by that for a quick view. But if you're calling as a principal, if you're entering to a building principal about hiring, you want to make sure that the person he's interviewing is not, you're not wasting anybody's time.
Yeah, and that's, I can't reiterate that concept. Formerly, tech apps teachers, certified teachers, and CTE teachers that teach courses for tech apps credit. There's a lot of interesting moments. Yes?
Yeah, Travis, that's a good point. And educator certifications told us, don't use that.
The chart.
The crosswalk chart.
Right.
Yeah, because that's not been updated, so go to the rules.
And that's a point that Diane just shared with us as we were walking in. The rules are really your absolute authority on hiring and credentialing. And the catering was part of this conversation. It's helpful just as you're diving in to think about a chart format, but the rules are going to have the detail, and they're going to have all the specificity that you're going to be accountable for. So.
I don't have it in front of me. I'm just trying to make sure I use the right thing. Which one of these is titled teacher assignment chart? Because that's what I've been using during my hiring process. Which one is the teacher assignment chart?
231.
So it's the one that you said you use?
Are you using like a spreadsheet that has like the class on one side and then what they can teach on the other, like almost like an Excel document? No, what it is chapter 231 is actually the rule of law. It's written by the
It's a narrative, yeah.
Yeah, and chapter should look like that.
Well, folks, our time for this part of the topic is up, but if you have other thoughts or questions, do throw a sticky note on the parking lot. We'll be sure they're addressed. The rules are the best.